The sharp sting of the April wind cut through my coat as I approached the security gate at the naval base. Around me, the air buzzed with the chatter of families and high-ranking officers gathering for my father's retirement gala. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my invitation, its edges slightly worn compared to the glossy, gold-embossed envelopes everyone else held. The guard at the gate gave me a polite nod before scrolling through the digital guest list on his tablet. He paused, frowned, and checked the list a second time, before looking up with a look of genuine embarrassment. "I am truly sorry, Mom," the guard said, keeping his voice low out of professional courtesy, "but your name is not on here." A cold knot immediately formed in my stomach as I looked past his shoulder toward the main entrance. Just 50 yards away, my father stood in the center of a circle of admirals, his chest decorated with medals and his laughter echoing through the courtyard. His gaze drifted across the lawn and locked onto me for a single freezing second. He did not wave, he did not smile, and he did not step forward to help me. Instead, he simply turned his back. Through the glass doors of the reception hall, I could see my brother Luke, looking immaculate in his tailored white uniform. He was smiling warmly, shaking hands with dignitaries. While photographers captured every angle of our glorious family legacy, the muffled sound of applause filtering through the building felt like a physical blow, a reminder that I was completely out of place. That familiar hollow ache from my childhood rushed back, reminding me of all those years spent as the invisible daughter who never fit the mold. But as I stood frozen at the perimeter, the initial sting of humiliation quickly hardened into something entirely different. Instead of arguing or causing a scene, I turned around and walked back to my car with slow, deliberate steps. I popped the trunk, revealing a heavy garment bag that had remained hidden from my family for over a decade. Unzipping the dark fabric, I let my fingers brush against the pristine, razor-sharp creases of my own dress whites. No one inside that building had any idea what I did for a living, let alone who I had become. My father and brother believed they had effectively erased me from their special day, but they had no idea about the 3 silver stars waiting to rest on my shoulders. Growing up in Virginia, beach meant living in a world dominated by the constant hum of fighter jets and the rigid traditions of military life. In our household, the Navy was not just a career path. It was a sacred religion, and my father, Captain Arthur Vance, was its high priest. He ruled our home with the same absolute authority he used on the deck of a warship, demanding perfection from everyone around him. From the moment Luke could toss a football, my father chose him as the chosen heir to the family legacy, grooming him for command while I watched from the sidelines. While Luke spent his summers at athletic camps and leadership seminars, I preferred the quiet safety of our local library. I spent my days analyzing historical military strategies, solving complex mathematical puzzles, and studying foreign languages that felt like secret codes. To my father, true strength was measured by physical endurance and a booming voice that could carry across a crowded deck. He simply did not know what to do with a daughter who fought her battles with a notebook and a sharp mind. I still remember the suffocating embarrassment of hearing him tell our neighbors that I was the sensitive, quiet child. The divide between us became an unbridgeable chasm during the spring of my senior year of high school. The entire neighborhood gathered at our house to celebrate Luke's acceptance into the Naval Academy, complete with banners and endless toasts to his bright future. That exact same week, I had quietly won a prestigious national decryption tournament, outperforming hundreds of senior university students. When I showed my father the certificate, he merely offered a distracted nod and remarked that it was a nice hobby but not a real commission. Those subtle rejections accumulated over time, building an invisible wall that kept me completely isolated. Even the family photos displayed on the Shaw living room mantel told the exact same story of my exclusion. There was my father standing proud with his arm around Luke's broad shoulders, and my mother smiling radiantly beside them. I was always positioned at the very edge of the frame, looking like an afterthought or a guest who had accidentally wandered into the shot. I learned very early that my role in the Vance family was to remain in the background, a shadow that never dared to eclipse the golden boy. So when it came time to choose my own future, I stepped far away from their parades. I chose a life in naval intelligence, a classified world where operations took place in windowless rooms behind heavy, biometric security doors. My contributions were never celebrated with public ceremonies. but the stakes were higher than my family could ever comprehend. There was Operation Blackwood, where my team spent 40 straight hours blocking a massive cyber attack aimed at an active carrier strike group. Had we failed, thousands of American sailors would have been left defenseless in hostile territory, but we succeeded, and the fleet sailed onward without a single disruption. No headlines were ever written about what we did. A year later, during an operation codenamed Desert Phantom, a specialized military unit found themselves compromised and surrounded behind enemy lines. With their communications completely blocked and time running out, I bypassed standard protocols to reroute a surveillance satellite, providing them an escape route. They extracted safely, but the official reports attributed their miraculous survival to favorable weather and pure luck rather than intelligence support. Then came the intercept of an unregistered freighter carrying illegal weaponry through the dark waters of the Pacific. A crisis averted because of coordinates I personally decoded. The world remained safe, entirely unaware of the disaster we prevented. My achievements were documented in sealed folders, and my decorations were stored in velvet boxes inside a secure desk drawer. My most valuable possession was not a medal, but a crumpled, handwritten note from an operator whose team I had guided out of the darkness. It simply stated that they were going home to their families because of my voice on the radio. That single scrap of paper was all the validation I needed, proving that my existence mattered even if my own flesh and blood refused to see it. Yet a deep sense of isolation always followed me into those secure facilities. I held those classified victories close to my chest, fully aware that I could never share them with the people who shared my last name. To my parents and my brother, I was merely a mid-level analyst who spent her days typing up administrative reports in a safe office. They genuinely believed that the grand naval heritage they bragged about was maintained solely by men like them who wore shiny medals on their chests. They never once suspected that the very global stability allowing them to host their lavish celebrations was secured by the work I performed in the dark. I slipped past the secondary security checkpoint using my official credentials and quietly walked into the back of the auditorium. For the time being, I wore a simple black dress, blending seamlessly into the rows of civilian guests and distant relatives. The atmosphere inside was grand, with massive banners hanging from the rafters and brass instruments gleaming under the bright stage lights. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone and began a lengthy speech, praising the Vance bloodline for its decades of flawless service. Every word felt like a deliberate attempt to rewrite history by omitting my existence entirely. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause as Luke stood up, saluting the audience with the practiced charisma my father had drilled into him. The adulation felt like a hammer blow, reinforcing the narrative that he was the sole keeper of our family name. When the speaker explicitly acknowledged the children of Captain Vance, my name was never uttered, a calculated omission that felt entirely rehearsed. I could hear the faint, pitying whispers of nearby family friends who wondered why the daughter had settled for a boring desk job. Those careless words stung. But my attention shifted when I noticed a group of young officers nearby. One of the junior officers leaned over to his colleague, pointing toward the back row with a look of absolute shock. "I am telling you that is the Rebecca Vance from the Joint Intelligence Briefings," he whispered, his voice filled with sudden reverence. Hearing those words made me realize that the wall of anonymity my father constructed around me was beginning to crumble from the outside. The ultimate proof of his betrayal, however, lay on a nearby table where a stray logistical packet had been left behind. My eyes scanned the final guest list, and there, in my father's handwriting, was the directive to exclude me. The written command explicitly stated that my presence would only distract from the recognition my brother deserved on his big night. Seeing those words written in black ink extinguished the last lingering remnants of my childhood, longing for approval. My own father had deliberately locked me out of his celebration, not because of a mistake, but because of a conscious choice. The old feelings of being the unwanted girl at the edge of the photograph faded away, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I refused to allow them to dictate the terms of my life or my career any longer. I walked out into the long corridor to clear my head, my heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. The hallway was quiet, but as I approached a recessed doorway, I heard the tense, urgent murmur of my brother's voice. "If she walks into that room in uniform, It ruins everything I have built, Luke whispered to a senior colleague, his usual arrogance replaced by pure panic. He sounded desperate, completely stripped of the easy confidence he had, displayed on stage just moments before. His friend offered a quiet, non-committal response, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden vulnerability Luke was showing. That brief, stolen conversation revealed everything I needed to know about the dynamics of my family. It was not disdain that drove my father and brother to exclude me from their world. It was absolute terror. They were fully aware of what I had achieved in the shadows, and they knew my achievements would completely overshadow their public accolades. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing the edges of the worn note from the sailor I had saved. The truth did not require me to scream or make a scene. It simply needed to be seen. I walked out to the parking lot, the crisp coastal air filling my lungs as I sat in the driver's seat of my car. I carefully changed into my dress uniform, fastening each gold button with a sense of purpose that transcended any family drama. When I pinned the 3 silver stars of a vice admiral onto my shoulders, the weight felt like a profound validation of my journey. Looking into the rearview mirror, the hesitant girl who had spent her life seeking approval was entirely gone. In her place stood a flag officer who had earned her rank through sacrifice and silent victory. A secure text message flashed across my phone screen from a mentor at headquarters, reminding me that my presence was requested by leadership. I took a deep breath, adjusted my cover, and stepped out of the vehicle with absolute certainty in my stride. I did not return to that auditorium to seek revenge or to ruin my father's retirement ceremony. I returned because I belonged in that room, and it was time to stop hiding the reality of who I was. As I pushed open the heavy double doors at the back of the hall, the room fell silent. My boots struck the floor with a steady, rhythmic cadence that seemed to echo through the sudden stillness of the crowd. Heads began to turn, and the casual conversations in the back rows completely died away as the silver stars caught the light. Halfway down the aisle, a gruff, heavily decorated master chief from the special warfare community suddenly turned around. He recognized my face instantly. From the classified extraction operation that had saved his team in the desert. He stood at attention so fast his chair screeched against the floor, his voice booming through the rafters as he called the room to order. "Admiral on deck," he shouted, his voice carrying the immense weight of absolute respect and battlefield gratitude. In an instant, a wave of motion swept through the auditorium as over 200 elite service members rose to their feet. The collective sound of chairs moving in unison sounded like a clap of thunder, shaking the very foundations of the room. The master of ceremonies froze on stage, his microphone dropping with a loud screech as his carefully prepared script became entirely useless. My father's face completely drained of color, his glass of champagne hovering mid-air as he stared at me. Luke looked as though he had seen a ghost, his mouth open in disbelief as his entire world shifted on its axis. I continued down the center aisle with a calm, unhurried pace, never breaking eye contact with the stage. Every single officer in the room remained locked in a rigid salute, honoring the rank and the history written on my uniform. I did not say a word, nor did I need to, because the truth was now entirely undeniable. I had spent 15 years being written out of their narrative, but with a single walk, I claimed my place. I walked directly to the front row, acknowledging the salutes with a crisp, professional gesture before taking an empty seat near the center. The sheer authority of the gesture completely redefined the energy in the room, shifting the focus away from my father's past to my present. One by one, the highest-ranking officers in attendance began to break formation to approach my seat, extending their hands in deep respect. A 4-star admiral leaned down, telling me how honored he was to finally meet the brilliant mind behind our regional strategy. Their words were quiet, but they carried a validation that erased a lifetime of family neglect. From the corner of my eye, I watched my father slowly lower his glass, his hands trembling slightly as he sat down. Luke remained completely motionless, his eyes glued to the floor, entirely unable to look in my direction or face the reality of my rank. Their long silence spoke volumes, a public confession that their attempts to diminish me had failed completely. I sat with perfect composure, my hands folded over my cover, completely at peace with the storm I had created. The audience began to applaud, a spontaneous ovation that was earned through merit rather than family tradition. When the reception finally concluded, the guests began to filter out into the evening air, their whispers echoing through the large hall. Luke approached me first, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and profound disbelief as he asked how long I had kept this secret. 15 years, I replied simply, letting the weight of that number settle between us like a physical barrier. He stepped back, looking completely crushed by the realization of how completely he had misjudged my life and my career. Then my father walked up to me, his chest heaving as he stared at the stars on my shoulders. He did not offer a grand apology, nor did he attempt to justify the decades of exclusion and the erased name on the guest list. Instead, he looked into my eyes for a long, silent moment and gave me a single, slow nod of respect. It was the very first time he had ever truly looked at me as an equal, an acknowledgement that could not be taken back. That silent gesture spoke louder than any speech he could have given, proving that he finally understood the magnitude of my success. I turned away from them, walking out into the cool night air with a light heart. 6 months later, I returned to my parents' home for a brief visit, finding the old house exactly as I had left it. Yet, as I walked into the living room, I noticed that the central display cabinet had been completely rearranged. Luke's academy portrait had been moved to the side, and in the center sat a framed photograph of my promotion ceremony. My father sat at the dinner table, asking detailed questions about my current command with a tone of genuine admiration. I smiled quietly, realizing that the greatest validation had never actually come from their approval, but from the strength I found within myself. Please like and subscribe my channel if you loved your military.